In this lesson, we'll import some geometry and talk about display modes. So I'm starting with a brand new Houdini scene here. And what I want to do is import a piece of geometry from an external source. So you may be working with somebody who's modeling in Maya or Cinema 4D or any other piece of software, and you need to get that geometry into Houdini so that you can work with it using the Houdini toolset. Well, we do that very simply by coming to File, Import, Geometry. That'll bring up this dialog box here. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is that your path is set to this $hip. Now, we already saw earlier in the course when we set up our project that we set a variable for $job. $job just pointed to the directory that our project was based in. $hip refers to wherever the current Houdini file that you're working on is saved. Now, since we didn't save this file before trying to import geometry, $hip is just dumping us in the default user directory. And you can see that if you just hover over the $hip variable here, it'll expand and show you exactly where it's currently pointing. So right now it's in C users John. Well, what we want is actually for that $hip to be set. Now, in order to set it, we just need to save this file. So let's go ahead and do File, Save As, and we want to save this inside of our project directory. And since we've already set that up as $job, I can just click on $job here, and it will actually take me to that directory. So inside of my job folder or my project folder, I want to save this file, and I'm just going to call it 09begin. Now notice that it's 09begin.hip. Now that's a good indicator that'll give you a little bit better idea as to what $hip is. So $hip refers to wherever the hip file is saved. Now even if you're working with a non-commercial or indie version, you may have a little bit different extension. This might be hipnc or something else, but that doesn't matter. All the hip file or the hip variable refers to is where the current file is saved. So let's go ahead and accept this. That'll save this file in that directory, and it'll also set our hip variable to be wherever this file is saved. And you can see that now if we go ahead and try to import some geometry again. So let's come over to File, Import, and Geometry. Now we still have the $hip variable located here inside of our path, but if we leave our mouse over it and it expands, we can see that it's no longer pointing to C users John, that it's actually pointing to wherever that hip file was saved. In this case, we saved it inside of our $job variable, so it's located in the intro course folder. And that's just great. Now, using $hip, and the reason we want to use $hip and $job in these different variables is because we can now, whenever we import this geometry, it won't matter where it exists on the hard drive as long as $hip is referring to our project directory where the file is saved. So we can now move it to anywhere on the network or anywhere on anybody else's hard drive. We could put it on a thumb drive and take it to another computer. And if we go to launch this particular hip file, then all of the links to the geometry that it's pulling in will be relative to that particular file. So let's go ahead and import our geometry. Now the geo folder was actually created whenever we created our project earlier in the course. I've gone ahead and put this conceptcar.obj inside of that geo folder. Now if you're working with any type of geometry from an external source, as we are in this case, you'll want to keep that geometry inside of the geo folder. So I've selected the concept car. It's populated here in my path now. I can hit accept. And that'll bring that piece of geometry into my Houdini file. Now you can see here that the path that it's looking at is $hip geo conceptcar.obj. And you know this is a variable here because it's highlighted in yellow. And we know that $hip refers to the location of our file. So all is well. Now I know that I've also imported this piece of geometry for a couple of reasons. Number one, I can look over here in the network view and I see I have this new node called concept car. If I dive inside of it, I can see that I have this node that is a file node. You can see that because that's what it's called right here. And that file node is pulling in the file $hip geo conceptcar.obj. Now, if I want to see my car here in the viewport, I'm just going to choose the View tool here from the viewport. And I'm going to just tap A on the keyboard. That'll zoom out so I can see all of the geometry in my viewport. So here I've got my car, and that's really nice, but I can't really tell exactly how that vehicle is constructed. I'd really like to be able to see some of the construction, the topology, how the polygons are put together, and get an idea of what it is that I'm working with. Now, in order to do that, we just need to change the display mode. And that's pretty easily done in Houdini. It's this third icon from the left here on the top toolbar of the scene view. So we'll just click and hold down your mouse. That'll let this little flyout menu happen. And I want to choose Smooth Wire Shaded. That'll let me see the wireframe on top of the smooth geometry that's underneath. Now this gives me a really good idea of what it is that I'm working with. I can see that some of my polygons have already been triangulated, some of them have not. I get an idea of how dense my model is. I can see if I'm working with a really high poly model or a medium poly model. Just give me an idea of what it is I've really got here. Now, one thing that you may have noticed whenever we imported this geometry was that it was kind of big. Now, the reason I say it's kind of big was because earlier when we were creating default boxes and spheres, most of them fit to the general construction plane. Now I'm going to hide this car using the display flag that we discussed earlier. So I'm just going to hide it, and you can see here that the construction plane is really very, very small, and in order to see the car we had to zoom way, way, way out. Well, that leads us to a little bit larger discussion. How big is this car? How big is the construction plane? And does any of that really matter whenever we're actually working inside of Houdini? Well, the answer is yes. Object dimensions and scene scale have a huge impact on the way that your animations and dynamics will play out inside of Houdini. In fact, it's so important that we're going to dedicate the next lesson to discussing nothing but object dimensions and scene scale.